Jim, Rufus's question is about the 30 for 30 special on Ric Flair. He says, out of all the guests or contributors to the show, you seemed like the only credible and believable source. I admire your infinite knowledge of the business. My question to you is, how long did they talk to you, and what was left out?
Oh, my God. Well, for one thing, it's literally been almost 2 years. So it was probably about really 30 or 45 minutes. It wasn't an in-depth thing. I had driven – I've looked better. My hair was a bit aflutter and et cetera, but I had just driven almost 300 miles from the big time wrestling event in Raleigh the previous night back in February of 2016, I believe it was, where I'd been manhandled by Jimmy Valiant. And that was the day that I had the match with Baby Doll in Spartanburg. But I'd left early and driven almost 300 miles to get to Spartanburg to go next door to the hotel where they were shooting some interviews and do that, and then go over to the show that day. So I can't really remember everything we covered. There was more on something I thought they should have brought up, and I remember mentioning this, was when Flair talked about as much as he drank and every day that he worked and he traveled and et cetera for those years, and there wasn't really any exaggeration. But I've told the story about how he always had a contest with Stan Lane when it came, not that kind, when it came to the states with the athletic commissions where they had doctors that would examine you before the matches. Flair at 240 pounds and Stan in those days 225, 228, whatever. And both of them, in their mid-30s at that time, maybe Flair's a little older, had resting pulse rates of like 42 and 47. They would had a contest to see who had the lowest pulse rate. But Flair's was like a marathon runner. With him drinking, which that's a Stan never drank nearly to any degree what Flair did. So Flair, that heavy of a drinker at that size and that age, and still have that, he's a genetic fucking freak. And I remember mentioning that. I thought they should have put that in, but no, I mean, I thought it was a great piece, and I didn't want to be more than just a cog in the wheel. And I thought, I don't know why they had, well, I guess I do because they're names, but a couple of the girls from the news shows or whatever, the Maria Menounos and et cetera, that I guess they've known him recently. But that, that spot may have been reserved for more comments from Ricky Steamboat or whatever. But otherwise, I thought they did a great job. And I didn't hear anybody say anything that was not true or, correct in the flavor of it, at least. I really didn't.
In the flavor of it. I mean, if when Flair said he drank 10 beers and 5 mixed drinks every day, well, I've been with him on days where he wouldn't have had time to do that. But then I've heard about times where I wasn't with him that he probably made up for it. So, it just, it depends. But the flavor of it was pretty much on everybody's part was pretty much correct. As someone who was around him at the height of Jim Crockett Promotions in the 80s, and then you got to see what happened when Jim Herd got put in charge and Flair was on the booking committee and then eventually Flair left. What is it like for you? Because you weren't there when this period of time, I guess from really the end of Jim Herd up until the end of WCW, even beyond that, where seemingly Flair has admitted that he lost his confidence, that he didn't have that confidence anymore. What's it like for you to hear that, considering you got to see the other side of him?
Oh, but I could believe it because, and Rick has admitted to it, and will tell you, he would go through periods where he would constantly ask, was that okay? Or what do you think? He wouldn't have the confidence for whatever reason. And part of it came because of the people trying to constantly replace him instead of – he was the most successful booker that they ever had during the Herd administration because he's the only guy that would stand up to Jim Herd. None of the other people ever stood up to him. And so he's the only one that had any success with the pay-per-view buys and the ratings the whole time that Herd was there. And I know that for a fact because I've written about it in the Midnight Express book. Kevin and I kept the records. Everybody else was a committee or people that would, defer to Herd more often than not, and it all went to shit. But that started taking a toll on him, and instead of
people saying, "Oh my God, we're lucky we got Flair." You know, the guy in the business, in the ring. He's our fearless locker room leader. You know, he's our champion. We can always get a house out of Flair. We can always get ratings out of Flair, and it was all true. But then you got this guy. Oh, you're too old. We had to cut your hair and make you a gladiator and put an earring in your ear and whatever the fuck. Then that's when he started doubting himself. And when he had finally, I think when he just said fuck it and quit. He quit first as booker rather than deal with her directly, and then quit not long after that as a wrestler to not deal with him at all. I think that's what started it. And then when the WWF contingent came in and took over WCW, which had been Flair's, it wouldn't exist. Ted Turner wouldn't have made the deal if not for Flair, and that's not supposition. That was recognized at the time. Flair was the key man. Ted Turner will buy this company if he gets Ric Flair. So Flair saves fucking company, puts it on national TV, and then Hogan and all the WWF guys come in because Bischoff don't give a shit about tradition or what. He just wants all these names that somebody else made to get numbers so he looks good. And they start beating the fuck out of Flair because he let him do it because he wanted to get the business over. But the more they beat the fuck out of him and made him look ridiculous, the more miserable he really was, until finally the run in the WWE at least redeemed him somewhat because he wasn't doing stupid shit and being buried in holes in the fucking desert or whatever, or kidnapped. And he was treated like a legend, and a whole new generation grew up. And most people have forgotten a lot of that bad WCW shit. When they think of the Attitude Era now, they think of the NWO, and then everything else is the WWF, because that was where all the cool stuff was. So they forgot about how Flair was made to look like a goddamn buffoon. And here's a bigger company and a better run company treating him like the all-time legend. So it kind of redeemed him. And I think that's where he got it back. Just my opinion.
When he would say, "What did you think of that? How was that?" Was that be typically about a promo or a match?
Well, I mean, sometimes it might be a match. Sometimes maybe not necessarily any promos. I think he knew the promos were pretty good, but a match or an angle or just an idea or whatever. That was where I coined the phrase. I think it was, we were in the airport the next morning after he and Luger had a match on a Clash of Champions, and the match was pretty good, but the rest of the Clash sucked a fucking large Peter. And that's where he came up the next day at the airport. We're at the gate, and he said, "What'd you think of the show last night?" And I said, or the match last night. I said, "Ricky stole the show, but it was petty theft." And he fucking popped. Right? But that was natural for him. It wasn't anything out of the way. He always wanted to know how everything was. He always wanted to please people.
Well, with that, the drive-thru is closed.
Jim.
Yes, Ole.
How did Ole get along with Jim Herd?
He suffered his presence. He didn't die on a lot of hills because he didn't give a shit, and he fucking laughed at him behind his back.
Hey, it's the Black Scorpion. But with that, the drive-thru is closed.